Hi, I'm Stan Masters, Social Studies Coordinator for the Lenawee Intermediate School District. I'm joined here today with the Honorable Judge Margaret Noe, and this opportunity to kind of talk a little bit about the recent Michigan Supreme Court case that was held in Lenawee County at Siena Heights University. If you want to start us off, Judge Noe, with just kind of a summary of this particular case and what happened.
Wonderful, thank you. It's wonderful to be here and to be able to address our students in this fashion. I want to thank Lenawee Intermediate School District and you, Stan, for helping that happen. As you may recall, Mr. King was convicted of a felony drunk driving charge in the year 2000. The selling of insurance is regulated because it involves money and trust, and it's money that won't be realized or benefit somebody to a later date. So you can imagine the trust that's involved in such a relationship. So you have to have a license to sell insurance. That's the law. Well, in 2004, Mr. King applied for a license to sell insurance. He fully disclosed that he had a felony. 2008, Mr. King was notified that the license they had given him in 2004 had been revoked because they had caught up with the felony. Now, mind you, he fully disclosed that, but they didn't have it in their records until 2008. The trial court ruled that he could keep his license, that that was the fair and right thing to do. The Court of Appeals said the same thing, that it's only fair that Mr. King be allowed to continue to sell insurance. Now, as we witnessed at Siena Heights University, through the kindness and generosity of Siena Heights University, Lenawee Intermediate School District, Adrian College, Jackson Community College was involved with that. Actually, it was all Lenawee schools were involved and participated in the preparation and the success of the date. We had the privilege of seeing all 7 Supreme Court justices hear oral arguments on the outcome of Mr. King's request to continue to sell insurance. The Supreme Court, as we now know, affirmed, they agreed with the trial court and the Court of Appeals and allowed Mr. King to keep his license. The Department of Labor and the Commission on Finance and Insurance are not happy with that decision. They believe that the law says if you have a felony, you may not sell insurance. End of story. The Michigan Supreme Court has, however, ruled to the alternative, and Mr. King is practicing the sales of insurance at this time.
Now, after the oral arguments, I think it was about 2 months when finally this Michigan Supreme Court came up with its decision. Was it a unanimous decision?
It was not, which is interesting from our perspective because we look to the Supreme Court for leadership and what we call precedent. We like to follow cases with the same way they handled them because we presume they put the time and energy into the study. The justices gathered, all 7 of them. They talked and they studied. And the majority ruled, which is how it is, 4 out of 7. At that time that we saw them at Siena Heights, you may recall that Justice Marilyn Kelly was the Chief Justice. Now that has since changed, and Justice Young is the new Chief Justice. But as a Chief Justice, they get to assign who will write the opinion. After they gathered, they all voted. It was 4 to allow Mr. King to continue to sell insurance, and 3 against it. Justice Davis, Justice Hathaway concurred with Justice Kavanaugh and Justice Kelly, saying that this man should be allowed to continue to sell insurance. The other 3 said no. That was Justice Young, Justice Corrigan, and Justice Markham. They said the language was clear and there should be no fairness exception, even though it played a hardship on Mr. King to give him a license and then 4 years later revoke it. How unfair. But the law is the law and it should be followed. What if he had been a sex offender? You might remember the oral arguments. If he had been a sex offender and he still got a license to run a daycare by accident, would we let him run a daycare? Of course not. And so the 3 justices who disagreed, we call that dissented. That was their argument. But majority rules. And even though they were all looking at the laws, the same laws, the 4 justices said fairness shall dictate, and we interpret these 2 laws this way, and it allows us to have judgment in the revocation of the license. It shouldn't be hard and fast. There ought to be some justice and equity implied.
Now, with that kind of decision, obviously there's some future implications because you can see both sides of the particular argument. What do you see as some of the implications now that the decisions are made to allow Mr. King to keep his license?
Right. Well, it would certainly beg the question of our legislators. Laws are prescribed or written by legislators. Now, the courts sometimes affect the way a law gets followed in our trials and in our court rulings. But the legislators are the writers of the law. We are not. So when the Michigan Supreme Court ruled as they did, they sent a message to the legislators, either clean that up in the writing of your laws, or presume this will be an area, what we call a gray area, or one subject to interpretation, which really could result in a problem. If somebody in Iron Mountain up north isn't allowed to keep their license because those judges ruled one way, and a judge in Ingham County, which is where this case originated, says you can keep your license, you would have an imbalance in the distribution of the law. And so we want to turn to our legislators, and we want them to use a keen pen, a sharp pencil, when they write these laws to preclude or avoid any disharmony in the carrying out of the law. So I see that, as with other 3-4, 4-3 decisions, that they haven't left us with a real clear-cut direction.
And some would argue that, again, in this particular case, there certainly was the presence of the separation of powers, but in this particular case, the cleaning up, as you said, was the judicial branch's way of kind of reviewing, saying,
right,
in this particular case, the law is hard to follow, or the laws in this case.
Thank you. That is true. We did get to see the blending of administrative rules, which really are the Department of Labor and the Commission on Finance and Insurance. We were able to see the court take a look at those administrative agencies and weigh their position in this against the law or the judicial part or branch of our government. And it was a great case to observe that blend.
Well, we have the case heard by the Michigan Supreme Court, the highest court in our state. What are the defendants doing now with this particular ruling?
Well, I would tell you that attorneys would be cautious to depend on the decision fully. They're going to want to weigh it closely. It wasn't a strong case, not in its ruling. The court has already ruled in this case, so Stephen King is probably safe proceeding in the practice of his insurance. I don't know that under the new court's leadership, as I indicated earlier, Chief Justice Young may lead a different kind of focus in his court. We also have Justice Corrigan has left. Justice Davis was not reelected after his appointment. We now have 3 new people on our Supreme Court, and 3 new people could be just about enough to throw a vote. I don't see further review of the King case. I don't know that the federal government will ever find what we're doing administratively in the state of Michigan compelling or affecting other states generally enough to want to take that case on. But sometimes they use a case that you would never expect. That's how we got everyone's familiar with the Miranda rights. Well, there really was a person named Miranda, and that happened in the state of Ohio, I think, and before you know it, every state in the land is reading Miranda rights. So you never know. I don't think that the King case is likely to evolve in that way, but it has that potential like every case.
Judge Noe, anything else that you want to tell our students today that may be viewing this particular video, again, about the proceedings of the court, or just things that we may want to learn as a result of this trial, this case?
Thank you. First of all the people that made this happen deserve a wealth of thanks from our students, families, from everyone in our community. I hope that having had the opportunity to see the Supreme Court in action, that you are as duly impressed as I am, that at the head of our state sit 7 very wise and influential people who have an opportunity to affect our everyday lives. And not only do I hope our students look to that career for a future that is full of honor and integrity, but they will appreciate what goes into making our lives better in a free state and in a community such as Lenawee County. We are very lucky citizens, and we are correctly and deeply affected by everything that goes on in our Supreme Court.
Thank you so much, Judge Noe, for your attention to this and your time today and sharing with us.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure once again.
And we thank you for watching today's video.